That's great. That's great. Look, I'm standing. Thank you. Feels so good. Okay, so there was this married couple, this sweet old married couple. They'd been married a very long time. They were discussing their retirement. And the husband says to the wife, he says, honey, what will you do if I die before you do? And she thinks for a minute. She goes, well, I think I'll find a house sharing situation with three single women, single or widowed women that are younger than me because I'm very active for my age. And then she turns to him. She goes, honey, what will you do if I die before you? He goes, well, probably the same thing. Life is beautiful when we have fun with it. Life is beautiful when we laugh. Lord knows we need a sense of humor, you know? And life is especially beautiful when we live with our hearts open. When we live with our hearts open. And it is a spiritual practice, isn't it, to return to love again and again, to return to peace and return to love. And that is the fruit of our spiritual life, though, is being able to mostly, if not always, live with our hearts open. It is the challenge of our spiritual life. And so my talk today is on mercy and forgiveness. And because the energies of mercy and forgiveness are really what allow us to keep our hearts open. They are really what allow that vibration of love to grow in our hearts and to be alive in our hearts. We're in the last week of Lent. This is Holy Week. This is the last week historically of Jesus' life. And I've really wanted our Lent to be meaningful. I started off Lent with our bracelet practice of seeing if we could not complain and not criticize and not gossip for 40 days. Anybody made it? Nice. Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome because, you know, sometimes it can be like a New Year's Eve resolution. You know, it's like we're good for a few days or a week maybe, but... And then I also spoke during this Lent period of transforming the difficult energies of jealousy and of envy and of greed, and that is important work that we do. And so today, though, those were fasting from those habits of mind, fasting from those thoughts. Today, though, I want to talk about feasting, because Lent is in part feasting. Sundays were the feast day. And I want to talk about feasting on these energies of mercy. Mercy. Just doesn't that word just soften your heart immediately? You know, mercy. Our world needs so much more mercy and forgiveness. Mercy and forgiveness. So we can think of love, the love in us. We can think of that as a river. And the love in us is a river. And we can think of difficult situations as rocks, right? Difficult situations are the rocks. Love is the river. And we can think of those big, challenging situations as dams, right? Those dam situations, right? Those big ones that you know, sometimes make us feel resentment or that make us feel anger. We can think of the river of love as God alive in us. You can think of the river of love as the Christ consciousness inhabiting our body, our embodiment, right? And when that Christ consciousness is damned, when that Christ consciousness is damned by those difficult emotions, we're cut off from peace. We're cut off from bliss. We're cut off from the happiness of our true nature. And so to keep this love that God is, this love that is a river, to keep it flowing in and through us, we practice forgiveness. We practice forgiveness. We can feel mercy and we can feel forgiveness and we can let go. Because life is about letting go, isn't it? Every day it's about letting go. Many times a day it's about letting go. I can't write enough songs about letting go. So I'd like to share with you one of my favorite poems, and it's an unknown author, but it's one of my favorite poems about forgiveness. I think I may have, in these last 2 years, I may have read this once before, but it's powerful. To forgive is not to forget. To forgive is really to remember that nobody's perfect, that each of us stumbles when we want so much to stay upright, that each of us says things we wish we had not said, that each of us says things we wish we had not said, that we can all forget that love is more important than being right. To forgive is really to remember that we're so much more than our mistakes, that we are often caring and kind, and that accepting another's flaws can help us accept our own. To forgive is to remember the odds are pretty good that we may soon need to be forgiven ourselves, that life sometimes gives us more than we can handle gracefully. To forgive is to remember that we have room in our hearts to begin again, and to begin again and again and again. Does that have meaning for you? Yeah, so this being Holy Week, this is historically the last week of the life of Jesus, and it was such an eventful week in the life of Jesus, the historical life, raising Lazarus from the dead, entering into Jerusalem, being honored as king with the palm branches laid in the road, and then the Last Supper on Thursday, and then Friday being arrested, tried, crucified, and laid in a tomb, all on so-called Good Friday. Why do they call it Good Friday? And then Sunday, Easter Sunday, the day of Ascension, the day of resurrection. What an amazingly big week. It's incredible. Now, we can interpret this week, this Holy Week, historically. And traditionally, Christians do that. We can interpret it metaphysically, which is much more of what unity does. I personally I like to focus on the teachings that Jesus offered, more than the history and more than the events, but the teachings that came through, and especially his teaching on forgiveness. Because his teaching on forgiveness, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, that teaching is so incredibly powerful. It's probably the most powerful forgiveness story we have in this day and age. And it's powerful not just because of the words that Jesus spoke, but the circumstances that were happening when he offered the teaching, right? The situation where he offered the teaching where he had so much mercy and forgiveness. You know, it was the worst, absolutely worst situation we could imagine, you know, being betrayed, being despised, being sentenced to death when you're innocent and you're full of light and you're full of love. You know, could we forgive people that much? That's always helpful. When I'm having a hard time forgiving something, you know, I think about that example. Could I forgive that much? Could I come even close to that, you know? But Jesus was the Christ. He was the Christ. He was fully awakened. He knew the truth of his being as one with love. He knew the truth of his being as omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. He wasn't identified with his body. He was identified, he was in a state of consciousness of oneness with all that is. And so that allowed him to be filled with love and mercy and forgiveness. You know, in a situation we can hardly imagine, because many of us would be filled with terror and fear in a situation like that. But his Christ state was so unwavering. His heart was so one, you know, with love itself, that he could have mercy for ignorance. I love that, you know. Can we have mercy? Because ignorance is really suffering. Being in a state of ignorance and feeling separate from everyone, that is suffering. And so he had tremendous mercy for that. I'm taking a class right now, a unity class called The Christ, and I'm really loving it because it really differentiates between Jesus and the Christ. And so the Christ state is a state of consciousness that we can all attain. Jesus was a historical figure that attained the Christ consciousness. So, when he offered that forgiveness, he was in his Christ state and it was unwavering. And he was able to offer love and mercy for hatred. There's a beautiful quote in the Bhagavad Gita that says, you want to see the heroic? Look at those who can offer love in return for hatred. Isn't that beautiful? That really explains, the greatness of this teaching and of Christ in that moment, I want to be that great. I want to have that capacity. I'm so inspired by it. So his message was that the Christ consciousness is attainable for each one of us, that we can develop it and express it, and that's what was so dangerous about him. That's why he was so threatening, because he was about empowering people to all become the Christ. Now, I must say that Jesus set a very high bar. He set a very high bar. He was destined to be a very great Christ. But we have a destiny. Every one of us in here has a destiny. We have a destiny for greatness. We can be that great. We can forgive that much, right? We've all felt betrayed or hurt or treated like we don't matter at times, and it takes time to work through. I met up in Ashland with a minister friend of mine up there, and we were talking about forgiveness, and she said, make sure you tell them that it takes time, and that's just, that's part of the forgiveness process. It really does. You can't contrive it. You can't force it. You can't push it. It really has to be authentic. But to get to that, there has to be an intention towards it and for it. You have to intentionally want it. So, this forgiveness teaching that Jesus left us as one of his very last teachings was so important, and I really feel like he left it for a reason. And the reason is if we live without forgiveness, if we live a month without forgiveness, if we live a week without it, if we live one day without it, we cut ourselves off from spirit. We cut ourselves off from love itself. We stop heaven from being our experience, and we feel a hell inside. And I've said this before, but forgiveness, it doesn't mean condoning wrong behavior. It doesn't mean we forget. It may mean that we don't have that person in our lives any longer, right? Because we have healthy boundaries, and that might be what's appropriate. So forgiveness doesn't have to involve the other person, and that person might be on the other plane, right? But it can involve the other person if it feels right. What really matters, though, is us getting to a place where we can let go of the blockages in our heart, the painful energies, the energies of those big rocks, of those dams, okay? So let me share from the Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles, I haven't shared much from the Course in Miracles over these 2 years, and I love it. And it has the best teachings on forgiveness. It's really powerful. This is what the Course says. What could you want forgiveness cannot give? Do you want peace? Forgiveness offers it. Do you want happiness, a quiet mind, a certainty of purpose, a sense of worth and beauty that transcends the world? Do you want care and safety and the warmth of shore protection always? Do you want a gentleness that can never be hurt, a deep abiding comfort and a rest so perfect it can never be upset? Do you? Is that a unanimous yes? Okay, just checking. And then it says, forgiveness offers everything you want. Yeah, this is truth. This is truth. Why is this true? Because peace comes from a heart that is at peace. We talk about a mind at peace, but our hearts need to be at peace, right? And forgiveness, peace comes from a heart that's at peace. And a heart that's at peace doesn't have any blockages. It doesn't have blocks. It has no rocks. It has no dams. Another quote from the Course says, the unforgiving mind is full of fear and offers love no room to be itself, no place where it can spread its wings in peace and soar above the turmoil of the world. The unforgiving mind sees no mistakes, but only sins. That's an important difference in discernment. I remember, way back in 1993, I think, I wrote a song called Forgiveness for two girlfriends of mine. They had been great friends, and they were both great friends of mine, and they were really estranged. One did something that the other one just could not forgive. And so I wrote them, they inspired this song, Forgiveness. And I was going to sing it for you, but my throat's not quite there. But I want to share the first verse because I really love what it says. It says, your soul speaks to me, and it tells me there's pain. Your heart behind the walls cries out a healing refrain, forgiveness. Poisonous is the fear that doubts the way love can heal. But doubt no more, you stand at the door to freedom. Free your heart with forgiveness. Free your heart with forgiveness. You know, fear comes from the ego self. Anger comes from the ego self. You know, it wants to be right. It wants to make the other wrong, and maybe it is right. You know, probably a lot of the time it is right. But what is it? What is a mind without the heart? You know, what would this world be if all we wanted was to be right? You know, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine, you know. We have to include the heart, and the heart doesn't care if it's right. The heart wants to love. The heart's just going to love, and the heart doesn't need to judge. The heart lets go of judging. The mind wants to judge, right? But we can let go of that. We can see it with mindfulness, and we can just let go of that need to be the judge. We can trust that karma and cause and effect will do its thing, right? Just let it go and let that take care of any need to judge. I read these words from Jesus in John chapter 12. I was so touched by. He said, I am come, a light into the world, that whosoever believeth on me might abide not in the darkness. I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. To save the world from unforgiveness. To save the world from a lack of mercy. To save the world from the darkness and the ignorance of hatred. I am come to be a light and save the world from the darkness of hatred and unforgiveness. I'm going to make myself cry. Now, you know, no doubt, I've talked about this before, we feel outrage at injustice, you know, and we should, because if we don't do something about it, then we're kind of complicit, right? We need to act against the injustice in the world. But we need to first look at ourselves. That's what my spiritual teacher, Alma, would say. She would say, well, first look inside and see if there's any injustice in you, and see if, you know, there's any greed in you or there's anything in you that needs uprooting. Start with yourself. But then work tirelessly for what is just, but do it from a place of peace. It's so much more powerful. Look at Gandhi. He's a great example of coming from a place of peace when facing injustice. Jesus, he's a great example, the greatest example. So love lets go. It doesn't need to enact justice. Love just loves. Jesus said, forgive them, Father, for they're ignorant, they're lost to love, they're full of fear and full of hatred and pettiness. I can forgive because I am love itself. And no one can kill that which I am. I am eternal being. And again, the Course explains this consciousness of Jesus, where he was when he shared that teaching. And it reminds us where to be, to come from a place of forgiveness. It says, forgiveness is the key to happiness. I will awaken from the dream that I am mortal, fallible, and full of sin, and know that I am the perfect Son of God. I am the perfect daughter of God. I am the mother, the divine mother of mercy, the Father of mercy. We are that when our heart is unblocked, right? We are embodying that when our heart is unblocked. So I recently it seems like I either choose my talk because it's something I'm working on, or I choose my talk, and then something appears that I have to work on on that very subject. So I had a recent chance to practice forgiveness, and anybody relate? But no, I had this situation, and I'll spare you the details, but it was this new friendship, this new blossoming friendship with this person, and I was being kind of a mentor for them, and I was kind of giving them a lot of time and attention and energy, and they did something that was out of integrity. They did something that was, it was completely motivated from self-interest and money, actually, so kind of greed, so. I was really disappointed, and I went through a process, and I had been seeing that person with rose-colored glasses because that's kind of what I do. I think mostly that's a good thing, but this person showed me that there's some work to do there. There's some unconsciousness there, and I had to really work through some feelings of feeling resentful, feeling some anger. Disappointment and even feeling hostility because I did, let them know in writing that I thought the actions were unconscious. And so they didn't like that. So I had to receive those energies and work with that. But I worked on it, and I got to a place where I was really able to feel that I could step in that person's shoes. And I could kind of understand where they were coming from and maybe what they had been taught or not taught, And I was able to get into a place where I could see that it's okay. They make mistakes too. I make mistakes too. They make mistakes too. And I really got to a place where I could see the good in them, and I realized there's a lot of good in them aside from that selfish act. And I got to a place where I could really feel forgiveness. And so I sent them that poem that I read earlier and just wrote a really beautiful email. And I just felt the whole energy shift. And I just felt like the whole universe celebrated, And I just felt like if Jesus was just there beside me, he would have been proud of me, and he would have said, yeah, that's being the Christ. So I share that. There's a quote from the Course that talks about, practicing, learning how to forgive. And so I was practicing. The Course says, practice learning to forgive. You can learn today to take the key to happiness and use it on your own behalf. Spend 10 minutes in the morning and at night learning how to give forgiveness and receive forgiveness too. I did that too. I forgave myself because I thought maybe I didn't express that unconsciousness in the most gentle way. That could have been maybe more skillful. The Course says, open your eyes today and look upon a happy world of safety and of peace. Forgiveness is the means by which it comes to take the place of hell. Think about how, the lack of forgiveness is probably why people are in jail, right? I mean, you think about some of the crimes, and they're probably vengeance, or they're probably vindictiveness, or they're probably anger, or they're probably in the heat of rage, and they didn't have the skillfulness, and they didn't have that intentional choice to forgive, right? And so I love this, how it says, look upon a happy world of safety and of peace. Forgiveness is the means by which it comes to take the place of hell. Now, another thing that's interesting that happens with forgiveness, though, is we can feel like that other person should apologize first, And it's like, well, if they would just start it, because really they're at fault and I'm not, right? So if they would just offer an apology, then I could forgive. But you might be waiting a long time if you wait for that. And there's a great teaching on that. There's a great teaching from the Tao Te Ching. I love this quote. It says, after an attempt at reconciliation, if bitterness still remains, what then? Meet the bitterness with kindness. The wise act well. The wise act well without demanding others do. Someone who ignores natural goodness is always concerned that they're properly honored. Someone who knows natural goodness honors their side of the relationship regardless. Now, I love that quote because, when you think of Jesus forgiving the masses for their murderous hatred, he was the supreme example of knowing natural goodness. He knew the truth of his being. And so he was going to hold up he was going to be who he was. He was going to be the highest expression of who he was. He acted as a Christ would. And so that's what we can ask ourselves, in a situation that's demanding. How would Christ, if he was right here beside me, how would he like me to act here? Just imagine that. Sometimes that really helps to imagine your spiritual teachers just with you and watching you and encouraging you to act in your highest vibration. So we are all this Christ in process. And when we meet the bitterness inside ourselves with kindness, we get to a place of wisdom and we can act well regardless of what others do. That's the key. That's the takeaway, to act well regardless of what others do, okay? When we do that, we are true to our glorious true nature. Now, here's one last thing. When you're hurting, and it's hard to get to the letting go, the Course in Miracles has a beautiful practice. I love this. It says, I need but look upon all things that seem to hurt me, and with perfect certainty assure myself, God wills that I be saved from this, and merely watch them disappear. Isn't that beautiful? I've been practicing that this week since I put that in my talk. When you're having a hard time, you can remember this affirmation, God wills that I be saved from this, because it reminds you that our Creator is so loving, is so merciful, is wanting nothing but our happiness, is wanting nothing but our well-being. So as we realize we are loved and beloved of the Creator, God wills that I am saved from this, that we are saved from all our suffering. We can let in that love that soothes our own hurts and our own wounds. And when we let that love in from the Creator, then it can flow out like a river. Then we can express the Christ that we are. Then as forgiveness flows through us, as mercy flows through us, the Christ in us is blossoming, right? And then we are as beautiful as spring when we're expressing the blossoming Christ in our own being. Every act of love, every act of mercy, every act of kindness, every act of forgiveness is another flower blossoming, another expression of the Christ, another bit of awakening of the Christ in you. So in closing, would you affirm with me, I am pure love. Let me not fear. I offer forgiveness to myself. I offer forgiveness to others. My heart is full of mercy. The Christ blossoms in me today. I behold the Christ in you. I behold the Christ in you. I behold the Christ in you. I see the light shining through. And I love you. Thank you all. God bless you.